You can hear words with your eyes. You may think that's a joke or some sort of weird trick, but it's true. It's a real phenomenon. And it's not just you. A lot of people experience this. So in this video, we're going to look at what it is and why it happens. And before we get into that, if you like videos like this, then please consider subscribing. It really helps me out. Okay, so you may have heard someone call you, and then you look over and see their name, and it looks like they're saying your name. Or maybe you've seen a word that sounds exactly like a person's name, and you turn your head toward where that person is sitting because you thought someone was calling your name. We all read and look at things with our eyes, but it's amazing how many ways there are to do that. Our eyes don't just passively receive the visual input in our surroundings, but actively select and interpret the visual scenes around us in order to create a meaningful perception of the world. And sometimes during this process, we make mistakes. That's what causes us to misperceive ambiguous visual input. And this is also what causes us to hear words with our eyes. It's called a McGurk Effect, named after two researchers, Harry McGurk and John McDonald, who first described the phenomenon in 1976. The McGurk Effect is an auditory illusion that occurs when there is a mismatch between what we see and what we hear. It's like when you're watching a video and reading the closed captions, but the audio isn't matching up. It's like the words are coming from different directions. And when this happens, we tend to perceive a combination of what we see and what we hear. For example, if you were to watch the word cat written on a screen while someone is saying the word fat, you might actually perceive the word caught because your brain is trying to combine both the visual and auditory inputs. But let's take a closer look at the research behind this phenomenon. A study published in the Journal of Experimental Psychology in 2004. Researchers measured how long it took participants to respond to visual words that were either the same or different from the ones they had just heard. They found that it took longer for participants to respond to different words, which suggests that they were actually reading the words more carefully because they were unsure if they had just heard them. Now, you may be thinking, wait a minute, doesn't this just mean that people are misreading things? Well, not necessarily. In fact, the McGurk Effect has been shown to occur even when there is no discrepancy between what we see and what we hear. For example, in a study published in the Quarterly Journal of Experimental Psychology in 2008, researchers had participants listen to a spoken sentence while they watched a video of someone else repeating the same sentence. Even when the sentences matched, participants still reported hearing the spoken version more clearly than the one they saw with their eyes. This suggests that our brains are always trying to integrate visual and auditory information, even when there is no conflict between the two senses. So why does this happen? It's because our brains are always trying to make sense of the world around us. When we see something, we don't just passively register the visual input, but actively interpret it in order to understand what it means. For example, when we see a chair, we don't just see a collection of pixels on our retina, but actually interpret it as a chair based on our previous experiences and knowledge. Similarly, when we hear something, we don't just passively register the sound waves hitting our eardrums, but actively interpret them in order to understand what they mean. This is why we can understand speech even though there is a lot of variability in the way people sound when they speak. But sometimes our brains can make mistakes when interpreting visual or auditory information. For example, when we see a word that sounds like a person's name, our brains can mistake it for a person's name, even though it's not. This is because our brains are always trying to find patterns in the world around us, and a person's name is a very predictable pattern. When we see a sequence of letters that form a word that sounds like a person's name, our brains can mistake it for a person's name, even though it's not. This is because our brains are always trying to find patterns in the world around us. And a person's name is a very predictable pattern. This also explains why people can hear words with their eyes. When we see a word that sounds like something else, our brains can mistake it for that thing, even though it's not. For example, if you see the word cat and it sounds like hat, your brain might mistake it for a hat because your brain is always trying to find patterns in the world around us. And a hat is a very predictable pattern. It's important to note that this phenomenon is not limited to just hearing words with your eyes. In fact, it can occur with other types of sensory inputs as well. For example, in a study published in the journal Cerebral Cortex in 2013, researchers found that participants could feel textures with their eyes by looking at images of them. This suggests that our brains are always trying to integrate different types of sensory information, even if they come from different sources. So why does this matter? Well, Understanding how our brains process different types of sensory information can help us to better understand the world around us. It can also help us to develop new technologies that take advantage of our brain's ability to integrate different types of sensory information. For example, virtual reality is a technology that creates immersive experiences by integrating visual, auditory, and sometimes even tactile sensory information. Understanding how our brains process different types of sensory information can help us to create more realistic and immersive virtual reality experiences. It's also important to note that this phenomenon is not just an academic curiosity. In fact, it has real-world implications. For example, people who have difficulty processing visual information, such as those with autism spectrum disorder, may also have difficulty processing auditory information. This can make it difficult for them to understand speech and other types of auditory information, which can lead to social and communication difficulties. Understanding the underlying mechanisms of this phenomenon can help us to develop interventions and treatments for people who have difficulty processing different types of sensory information. So the next time you're watching a video with closed captions, pay attention to whether the audio and the captions match up. If they don't, you might actually be able to hear the captions with your eyes. Hearing words with your eyes is a fascinating phenomenon that highlights the incredible ability of our brains to integrate different types of sensory information. While it may seem like a simple trick of the mind, it's actually a complex process that involves multiple areas of the brain, working together to create a coherent perception of the world around us. Understanding this phenomenon not only helps us to appreciate the complexity of our brains, but also has real-world implications for people who have difficulty processing different types of sensory information. If you like this video, then check out this video on 10 facts about your eyes that you didn't know. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to my channel to see more videos like this in your feed. Thank you for watching.